Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second day of Madrid Platform, which is the international hub where we're looking at business opportunities between Europe and Latin America. I am Marco de Lemo, and I am going to be your master of ceremonies for this second day. I remind you that you can tweet using the Madrid Platform hashtag, and there is simultaneous interpretation for the streaming. You can also ask your questions through the platform, and we will answer all the questions after each workshop. Now, today we're going to talk about sustainability, and we're going to start with the International Seminar on Sustainability in Business. We're going to look at the challenges raised by the pandemic and where the ecosystems, value chains and companies have to be included into businesses. And we're going to, first of all, have a presentation from Alberto Alonso de la Fuente, who is is in charge of development of ecosystems and the coordinator of the Spanish network called Impact Hub. And then we'll have a round table with Clara Diaz, Carmen Lara, and Daniel Truran. Clara Diaz is the project manager of MIDE. Carmen Lara is in charge of corporate communication for Bayer, and Daniel Truran is the B Corp ambassador for B Lab Europe. This will be moderated by Antonio Gonzalez, who is the CEO of Impact Hub Madrid. Welcome to Madrid Platform. Let's start. Hello, good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you very much for inviting us to be here today for this seminar. Thank you to those who have come here in person and all those who are watching us on streaming at the moment. Yes, my presentation works, so that's good news. This workshop is focusing on business sustainability. And first of all, I would like to explain who I am. I'm Alberto Alonso, as Marta's just said, and I am the Spanish coordinator of the Impact Hub network. And so we are one of the largest networks in the world. We have more than 100 impact hubs on 5 continents in 50 countries. We form this network, which is centralized, but then coordinated at a global level with a shared strategy where we have a local impact in our countries, cities, and even in our own neighborhoods. To go into more detail, in Spain, we have 5 hubs. We call it the Iberian network because we haven't forgotten our colleagues in Lisbon. And so we are here in San Sebastián, in the Basque Country, in Zaragoza, in Barcelona, Madrid, where we have 5 centers, and Malaga. And so I think we're going to get to the heart of the subject, and we're going to talk about something today which we're all familiar with. Indeed, today everyone in the world is familiar with these issues. We're talking about a global crisis which has spread around the world and which was caused by this virus, and it's causing lots of trouble. In Spain, this is our 3rd economic crisis in 30 years. And I describe it this way because this is the 3rd crisis since we've been a member of the European Union. And each of these crises has been worse than the previous one. And even if we take into account the financial crisis of 2008, which was a terrible crisis and had appalling social consequences, but today we are possibly talking about something that could actually be even worse. However, today, we have a coordinated response within the European Union and from the European Commission. And this is a major difference compared to the 2008 financial crisis, which is that together we have a shared vision of what has happened and what are the solutions to overcome this crisis. And this opportunity to recover together is not only designed to restore growth, but also to look at how we're going to grow. And so we're talking about an opportunity for recovery, taking advantage of a transformation in the productive model. So this is the big question. How do we want to reactivate our economy today? I was at home thinking about this presentation, and I was going to say, how can I visualize how we've restored economic growth in recent times, and how are we going to do it in the future? And so I looked at Google, and I searched for pharaonic works, hoping that there would be some huge investment in construction or a giant visual construction. And indeed, I ended up with the pyramids because we have pharaonic work, examples of pharaonic work from all sides of the political spectrum. But we know this model. And today, if we want to reactivate our economy in a different way, then we need to use different solutions. We need to use a local economy. We need to have an organic solution. We need to look at daily life. So these two models, which are being discussed and are being tested, and a bit later in this presentation, we'll go into this in more detail. But first of all, I'd like to just give you some of the big figures that the European Commission has put forward. So the Next Generation EU fund is unprecedented in the European Union. Last week, when Joe Biden in the US announced his recovery plan, the figures seemed astonishing, and we felt almost complexed in Europe that our plan wasn't as substantial. But we have to invest this money. With Biden is actually sending $1,500 checks to citizens in the US so they can go out and spend money in the economy. From our European perspective, this seems quite inconceivable. But we use other mechanisms, such as those which are here on the screen. So the Next Generation Fund selects projects, and it gambles on transformation of the economy through sustainability, digitalization, and other features. Now, what's Spain's role in all of this? Spain will be receiving 60 billion euros for the recovery mechanism. These are investment projects, and they are paid for in grants. So in the blue line, you can see Spain's budget. So Spain receives 60 million euros, 60 billion euros for these projects. Now, the criteria for this is GDP per capita, population size, and how is this money channeled in our country. So we have a recovery, transformation and resilience plan, which has been established by the Spanish government. It's currently being revised by the European Commission, which has to approve everything that has been put forward. Because the government of Spain has not managed this in a unilateral manner. They have coordinated it with the autonomous communities here in Spain and by managing expressions of interest where companies have been able to put forward projects for an economic transformation or a high added value. And the results of this is this report, which is downloadable from the internet. And this is generated guidelines from the government. There are 14 objectives and transversal axes. On paper, it looks great. But it's difficult for us to say whether this is a huge leap forwards or whether only some of it will be implemented. And this is the discussion. This document is now in the hands of the Commission. The Commission will give feedback, and after this feedback, will they say this is okay and this is not okay? These are the projects that can be financed and these are the projects that can't be financed. Then we'll move on to the next phase, which is the releasing of funds and the corresponding investment in the projects through an administrative mechanism that has yet to be defined. So, this was an introduction to really set the scene for where we are today. We all have this perception that things are slowly improving, that there's still a lot of health issues, but in terms of the economy, we seem to have moved into a recovery phase. And so from Impact Hub's point of view, we've been thinking across the Iberian Peninsula about where are we today and how, from our company, can we help to drive this recovery of the economy and do it from a sustainable perspective. This is sustainable recovery. So our the first thing is that we used the theory of change and developed a structure which identifies a series of goals. Where do we want to be? What do we want to achieve? So we have 4 key goals to get the key to a sustainable recovery. So one is to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And the lever for this is citizens' activation and actions towards change. So what does that mean? It means that citizens are the key, and they're essential in the next decade, which is the countdown to 2030, which is when we're supposed to have achieved the 2030 agenda. And citizens' actions are essential if we're to achieve these objectives and the SDGs. Because if we just look at the basic shopping basket of Spanish people, that represents 10% of the GDP of Spain. And so just through what Spanish citizens choose to buy on a daily basis has a huge impact. And I would like to link this with what a description of how society is in Spain. We talk about a certain amount of tension in the country, but indeed we see a country that is asking for change. 64% of the Spanish population would be willing to pay more for their products if these products would then benefit the local community. So this is their bread, their bakery, for example, their fruit shop. This is is higher than the average percentage of European citizens with this same goal. We also have been the leaders in organ transplants for the last 28 years in Spain. The second country behind Spain is the US. So this society, when it comes together and it mobilizes itself, is huge. And transformation starts from here at the bottom with the citizens. We've spent a decade or maybe 5 years trying to define the indicators for the Sustainable Development Goals, but now we have them, and now we actually have to get to work, and this is the decade of action, and citizens will be leading this process. Another objective. I would like to talk about the productive fabric in Spain, and particularly that of small and very small enterprises, SMEs. And with reflection to the 2030 agenda. They represent the vast majority of companies here in Spain. There's more than 3.3 million SMEs in Spain, and they generate 72% of gross added value, and they represent they financially support 76% of the Spanish population. And so they are an essential tool for achieving the SDGs and the Agenda 2030. And how can we do this? In Impact Hub, we have looked at the best practices in the European and global level, and there's two features. There's sustainability and digitalization, and they're two sides of the same coin. So we need a tool that helps us to achieve these objectives. And to be honest, at the moment, what we're seeing is that the SME fabric works hard and has little capacity to invest in this sort of mechanism. They don't have much time. So strategic coordinated plans that would allow SMEs to achieve sustainability and digitalization is absolutely essential, and not just from an economic point of view or a social point of view, or just because to allow the companies to survive. As we said at first, society are asking for companies to be sustainable. They want to purchase sustainable products. The third goal is to achieve self-regenerating economic structures. In many countries, we don't look at this just from an economic perspective, but we also look at a transformation. Transformation, which means someone is doing something completely different because they weren't comfortable or they didn't find what they were looking for within the established structures. And this is the secret of this continuing self-regeneration of the economy. Today, the world is changing in a disruptive way. It's constantly changing. And so we don't need strategic plans for 10 years, for example. What we need is economic structures that can auto-regenerate, self-regenerate, that they're constantly evolving and changing. And this is the only way that we will achieve a resilient society that can overcome and face these crises. And so what do we have to do? What's our leverage here? We need to develop capacities and skills within companies, and also we need to develop the entrepreneurial spirit in Spain. And so all of these existing companies need to continue to be entrepreneurial and to continue to self-regenerate. And so the final of our goals is to achieve a sustainable development across the whole of the country. And so these are our impact ecosystems. This is our leverage. So what does that mean? An ecosystem, an impact ecosystem has been something we've been studying in the Impact Hub. We presented our findings last year, and they were warmly welcomed by the academic community and the business and political spheres. And so this is to generate a methodology that would allow us to create sustainable values, focusing toujours on these three axes, which is economic and social and environmental. I'm going to talk about these impact ecosystems, which I think are the real key for reactivation through social entrepreneurship.
This is the model. I'd like to begin with this because I think maybe it's a little bit complicated. We're going to take a step behind so we can understand it a lot better. I'm going to tell you a small little story. About a year and a half, the hubs in Iberia, we said, well, for the last 15 years during the Impact Hub network, we've been saying that we generate ecosystems, we create communities, but we haven't stopped to think about in which way we did it, what was our methodology. So this is a story about how we organize ourselves in workshops, what was an ecosystem, what it needed to be to have value, what was the value. Does an ecosystem pulse? In what way does it pulse? So we started to define something that ended up structuring our framework. In the end, this allows us to publish this index for impact ecosystems. What it does, it measures the ecosystems that are present in Spain. The unit of measure are provinces, and we can classify, understand better, and generate a diagnosis of each and every one of them, so we can present improvements for these 15 years. Why ecosystems? Because there are companies, there are actors, there is private-public partnership. We're talking about many different things, as we can see here. We're going to get a bit closer. The model is composed and based upon the Eisenberg model. We haven't reinvented the wheel here. It's a very used model to explain ecosystem, public policy, culture, human resources, etc. When we started to classify our ecosystems in this manner, we realized it was the proper picture, but it wasn't a moving picture. We wanted to see the level of intensity of the ecosystems. So we look at the pulsing. That's the capacity of the ecosystem to generate value. Value from a holistic point of view. Value is not only about economic value, but it has to do with the well-being, sustainability, taking care of biodiversity. So we found this model from the Kaufman Foundation. It allows us to analyze the pulsing or the vibration through different layers. You have here the different layers on your screen. But there was something lacking, which is what you can see on your right, the Sustainable Development Goals. It's based on three different axes: the business one, the sociocultural one, and the environmental axis. All of these axes are very familiar to all of us. They remind us of closing the circle. This is the great added value from our Impact Hub network. If we add up all of these models, then I can show you the Impact Hub model. It seems complicated, but it's not. We can see three different colors, the three different axes, the economic business axis, the environmental, and the sociocultural. They seem like flowers in a way. Well, the flowers have petals, which are groups of markers. These groups add up over 130 markers that allow us to assess each axis so we can quantitatively analyze an ecosystem. This whole model is the Impact Hub model. And I would like to reveal here the top 10. Yes, we had since we had a grade, let's do a marking. The results, well, they're very interesting. Álava is the ecosystem that had the best grade after Madrid, and then Guipúzcoa. Well, this has a lot of meaning in itself. One of the things we learned, not because there's a bigger ecosystem, you do things better, or you generate a better vibration, a better pulsing. This is something that surprised us, because we thought that ecosystems that had larger cities inside will be more relevant. But there are smaller ecosystems, but that have their goals clearly defined. They work with a high level of collaboration, they're balanced, and they generate this impact vibration that we call. Well, I wouldn't like to give too much weight to the ranking, because this was on just to generate debate, so we can have more resources. But what we would like to look into is that ecosystems aren't better or worse. They're different among each other because they have different contexts and different vibrations. So if you look at this map, you can see the ecosystems in Spain divided in 5 large groups. The red ones are the 3 Basque provinces. They're leading, they're ahead, because this is order from left to right in increasing level of vibration. The ecosystems are differently ordained in the map. Here is Madrid and Barcelona, in the orange ones, together with Girona. The blue area is the plain in Spain, and in the southern plains is the green, and the Andalusian and Canary Island provinces. In general, there are always deviations. I would like for all of you to go into our website, and you can download and look at the results of your particular ecosystem, so you can see in what way this ecosystem vibrates. Well, this guide is downloadable, and all of you can look at it. What I would like to highlight, and that's what this roundtable is for, is sustainability. This mess that you see here, that seems very difficult to understand, is an analysis of markers' correlationships. All of these little squares are the petals from the model. They're groups of markers. This statistical model, we have environmental, sociocultural, and business. They're related. When one goes up, the other one goes down, and vice versa. This is a statistical model, and we can see in which way they relate to each other. What can we see visually? First, it will be in what way the business axis is very correlated. They act in a very compact manner. The second conclusion, statistically, the economic, business, and the sociocultural axis are very related. There's a huge relationship between culture, society, and the economy. But let's look closely. This is the most interesting issue. This is proven in our study with data. There is a clear disconnection between the environmental axis and the other two axes. This disconnection weakens ecosystems. The value that Impact Hub has here is considering the environmental axis at the same level as the other two axes. The vision of ecosystems is always very economical, business-like. We want to support ending this vision and to promote taking into account the environmental axis. It cannot be disconnected from the other two axes. This is our main goal. Why? Because those ecosystems that have a built-in harmony among the three axes, where those three axes are more balanced, are more interconnected, those are the ecosystems that generate a more sustainable and resilient value. I would like to finish to present some of the conclusions. First, I would like to promote ecosystems as a key to reactivation. What does this all mean? We can elaborate many strategic plans. We can try to understand public administration as important players at promoting policy. But if we promote ecosystems, we are creating an autonomous tool. It will allow us to generate value, employment, businesses, environmental sustainability, everything that makes economies to have a highly added value that will allow them to generate value. And it should be in harmony, it should be harmonized not only with the society and culture, but with the environment. This leads me to the second conclusion. Ecosystems have always been valued from a purely economical perspective. We have to abandon this mindset. Is the economy important? Of course, it is, but it's just one of the three axes that structure ecosystems. This is highly relevant because we have proven that if we give the same value to all three axes, we get different results, we can understand ecosystems in a different way, and we can activate them in a different way as well. I would also like to highlight impact ecosystems. What's the difference between an impact ecosystem and a plain ecosystem? Well, those systems that are capable of harmonizing the three axes and to keep them balanced become impact ecosystems. This means that any entrepreneurial activity, any service that comes out of companies within that ecosystem, any type of initiative becomes sustainable from its birth. not only from an economical perspective, but also from a social and an environmental one. That's why we need to understand those ecosystems and see how we can lead our ecosystems into impact ecosystems. Will allow them to generate sustainable things. And lastly, from Impact Hub, we have been able to understand throughout this study that private-public partnership is essential. Ecosystems feed and generate value based upon the communication within themselves. We can also see in our report that the grade that these ecosystems receive generally in Spain is fail. We need to all work together, all of the different actors. We need to communicate better so that ecosystems can have a better grade. And we need to understand also public administration, not only as the actor responsible for all of this to function. We need to understand the context. It's a very relevant actor, but it's just one of many. We need to have all of the actors work together in a round table, and this type of work will allow the ecosystems to generate this value, and they can become impact ecosystems. We've seen this in Álava and also in other ecosystems that have received very good gradings. And this is what I wanted to share with you. I would like to end my presentation by showing here our website where you can download our report about impact ecosystems. Well, I have talked about many things. I hope this was interesting to all of you. And now I would like to begin our roundtable so I can invite all of our other speakers here with me.
Y os voy a volver a presentar, aunque ya lo ha hecho Marta. A mi lado se acaba de sentar Daniel Turán, B Corp Ambassador, y en B-Lab Europe también tenemos a Clara Díaz, Project Manager de MIDE.
Daniel Durán, B Corp Ambassador in B-Lab Europe. Carmen Lara, responsible for corporate communication at Bayer. Clara Díaz.
Desde, creo, Barcelona. Carmen Lara.
Carmen Lara, responsible for corporate communication from Bayer Spain. She's from Barcelona, and so we're watching her on the screen. Can you hear us? Yes, wonderfully. Nice to be here with you. I would like us to start talking about the ecosystem from a point of view maybe more academic. How is this translated into the reality, the everyday life of companies? How does sustainability, how is sustainability live in companies? Well, after everything I've heard, I like this concept of markers that are either cold or warm. What are the markers that millions of people around the world know very well? It's the difference in points between Barcelona, Atlético de Madrid, and Real Madrid. We have to look at markers that bring it the attention of the whole team, that will allow us to have a ranking with other companies that are really worth it. Why is this worth it? Because it has something that allows you to move people into a certain direction, and everyone can recognize them as the best that are around of all of them. Of all of the markers, what does really attract you? You talk about vibration. What are the markers that make your team vibrate and make them move forward faster to achieve results, to make a difference? And I think those companies that are able to identify those markers are the most powerful ones. We have a CEO, we have a consultant that brings in those markers, or does the staff create those markers? Those are the most powerful ones that allow us then to move forward. What makes people be passionate, what brings a benefit to the company, what connects with your ecosystem or with your local community that allows you to move forward. Those warm markers, those are the ones that people are going to go for, that will allow a more holistic view in the company. And that's my experience from the B Corp world. Excellent. Clara. Clara Diaz, Project Manager at MIDE, Madrid Innovation Driven Ecosystem. What are the type of ecosystems that you try to promote from a sustainability perspective? Well, we're working sustainability as a cross-sectional axis. We work through the REAB methodology from the MIT, the seeks to promote regional programs. We work with 7 interest groups. Of course, public government is relevant, but as much as the other actors are. Then we have the role of startups, research centers, investors, and corporations, of course. Within our framework, what we have seen is that these 5 working groups are very well structured and presented, but there's still a long way to walk to be able to make a connection among all of them. We have defined some theme axes where Madrid has the largest potential. Regarding sustainability, well, this is an axis that is completely cross-sectional. I think there's a problem here with the sound because I'm wearing my mask. Can you hear me well? Well, this year we work first with the technological perspective. So we talk a lot about green data. We also work with the sustainability on the whole value chain. Buyer has lots of information they can share. We can work a lot on what type of information we can incorporate. We can have new policies, new ways to function. Circular economy is another theme we're talking a lot about. We're no longer talking about a single topic. It must be a topic that must be on the working table all the time, like B Corp is doing, like do things better for the world. Who's the world? Well, it must be better for all of us.
This is absolutely central to all of our discussions. Okay, very well, Antonio. How do you understand this movement towards sustainability in B-Lab? Well, we've become more aware of it and more aware of the urgency of the whole situation. I think that, as you know, we have spent the last 15 years talking about sustainability, impacts, social aspects. But it's true that in the last 2 or 3 years, it seems to coincide with the 10th anniversary of the network in Spain and the pandemic. And this has led us to think and to adopt this message from the UN of a decade of action. And I think that we're at a time when there is an economic urgency now, and it's critical. And it seems to us to be very important to reactivate all of these possibilities for collaboration and these internal transformation processes in companies, and that are already being moved forward by companies that are showing leadership. And it seems to me that in the next 3, 4, 5 years, they will be decisive. And I think that this concept of accelerating the transformation process via the generation of new ideas, innovations, entrepreneurial spirits, and collaboration through ecosystems, because there's not going to be one single player for each solution. This has to be a collaborative effort, and we have to involve citizens and all of the different stakeholders. And where a company wants to be the leader of their own ecosystem, this is a very powerful lever. In the same way as we have with the Vicor family, there's 100 of us in Spain, and it's good because the Vicor is growing in Spain, and it's an inspirational element. It's very powerful, and we are encouraging reflections and encouraging efforts in this direction. So I think we have a combination here of urgency and action. How can we change organizational behaviors? How can we generate more sustainability? And we can either do this in a transversal axis or in a number of different axes. I think this is the absolute priority for the social movements that we are aware of, climate change and the like. Excellent. Carmen, how do multinationals understand this? You have huge resources, your references for many companies. How do you see sustainability from Bayer's point of view? Well, first of all, thank you very much for having given me the opportunity to be here with you today. I think over the morning a number of concepts have been represented, and they give a good illustration of how we work in Bayer. The idea of transversality, collaboration, integrating sustainability as a vertical axis across the entire company, and the urgency of the action. We know that we're in a countdown here, and we need to share knowledge. And in Bayer, sustainability is essential, and it helps us to achieve our key goals, which is to progress R&D, and also the social and environmental aspects of our work, and the important interrelation between these actions and the development that we want to see in our society, in the country, and around us. And that's what we do here in Spain, but it's also what we do at the global level within the company, making progress in recent years. And in Spain, we're very present here. We've been in the country for 120 years, and we try and bring our contribution to the game and make progress in these goals. So the importance of these multinational corporations is very symbolic. Because, for example, when Trump withdrew America from the Paris Agreement, the U.S. multinational said, no, well, we're staying in it, and we're going to try and make progress with it. There's a lot of consequences. They're not just symbolic, but it's also the changes in the way that we work. And so I would like to ask a question to all of you now. How can we choose our indicators? We know what we have to do. We know it's the decade of action. So we've started the countdown. How can we come now down to reality? How can we incorporate this into reality? We have to do this now. It's urgent. I think we have to do it now. I feel quite the urgency of this. I want to do it now. And I think a very important aspect is activism, and activism from companies. For example, in Danone, our employees really liked the slogan, which was feeding the change. They liked this slogan. Another big multinational, Kisi, produced a campaign. We also have Too Good to Go, which is a small SME which works with big multinationals and talks about expiry dates for products. This is collaborative activism, and he works with the local town hall, with companies. Too Good to Go, for example, is this small company that works with big companies to work on food that's reaching its expiry dates. And this activism is what drives people to action and allows them to come into contact with businesses, because businesses have to create profits. They also have to resolve the problems of people, but they have to produce profits. And so we need activism, and it needs to drive the enthusiasm and motivation of these people so that clients, investors, everybody within the company's infrastructure or ecosystem is motivated for change. I agree. I think we need to do well what we know how to do well. Some companies, including transnationals, have a turnover which is bigger than the GDP of certain countries. How can they use this influence wisely? And how can they improve their processes and their systems? So if we look at startups, how can we work with subjects that are so innovative? And how can we find answers to all of these problems concretely? And if we look at investors, well, we think that there needs to be impact investments. We need to have a social or an environmental impact when we make our investments. Equally, public authorities also have to try and do this and have a regulatory framework, for example, which encourages these types of investment initiatives and which does not encourage the practices that we know are not environmentally sustainable, they're not suitable for today's world. And from this, what we can all do better is be more open to these different solutions. So a corporation could launch a challenge and find looking for a solution to a problem that it has, but the solution could be provided by a startup. And the capital to finance this could come from, yet again, a third source. And we could have a technological center that could also play its role in this. So we have this responsible activism, and we need to work together in a collaborative way. You're talking about investments here, financial investments. And I think this is very important because there is a tsunami occurring here, a real change in paradigm and scale, where the big funds are clearly seeking to invest in sustainable businesses. And yesterday, I saw a Spanish bank saying we will not be providing credit to or financing to any company that uses fossil fuels. And when we talk about this, we often think that it's a bit of a avant-garde citizens activism, but no, now we have boards of companies and boards of big investment funds saying, no, we will not invest in these non-environmentally friendly projects. So if we go back to the initial question of how to bring this down to the grassroots, I think the challenge of the ecosystem is very interesting because we talk about then relations. In an ecosystem, what is it? It's a whole set of stakeholders and infrastructures. But the most important aspect of all of that is the relationships between the stakeholders and their tools. And so if we look at the relations, that is what generates the change internally. And instead of looking at the relationship with their own employees, to their relationship with their stakeholders, their consumers, their suppliers, and the relationship with basically everybody in their surroundings. And each one of these elements could have a clear impact on where these changes can be the most effective with regards to teams or suppliers. And we need to look at our ability to mobilize. And we need to measure what is your relationship with your team, but also with your suppliers and your stakeholders. And I think this is a very important element. And then we have the consumer side of things. And again, here I think there are big changes taking place, changes in perspective. And it's not just now communication for communication's sake, but communication to change consumer behavior. The other day I was listening to an important company, and the sustainability director said, what we have done internally is we've gone through a big process, we've designed a strategy, we've implemented processes, we've changed our production, etc. But now what we need is for our suppliers and our customers to work with us in this change process. And so we need to look not just internally to the company, but also look to everybody in the entire chain. How can I influence the behavior of my consumers, and how can I influence the change in behavior in my suppliers? And I think this is the interesting feature that we're looking at the moment. Carmen, would you like to add something from Barcelona? Yes, I think the best way to look at this subject is to look at what we're doing internally and with Impact Hub. We are committed to sustainability, and this has taken the form of a strengthening of our mission, reducing our carbon emissions, seeking to be carbon
Este
neutral
es en
by
términos globales, en
2030.
todo el
This
mundo.
is the
En España
big goal
estamos analizando toda
worldwide.
nuestra cadena de
In
valor
Spain,
como primer
we're
paso
looking at the
para
value
empezar a
chain
reducir, ¿no?
as the
Entonces,
first
en esa
stage in
cadena de
achieving
valor
this, and in the value
estamos
chain,
analizando todos nuestros centros, la
we're
actividad
looking
de
at
los
all
9
of
centros que
our
tenemos en el país,
centers
donde
of
tenemos plantas de
activity in
producción, centros de
Spain,
investigación,
and
pero
production
también
plants,
estamos analizando nuestros
and we're
proveedores, ¿no?
also
Porque ellos son también, y a través de ellos, es
looking at
una
our
de los generadores de estas
outlets.
emisiones, y para poder reducir nosotros
We're
las
looking
nuestras,
to
tenemos que
how we
acompañarles también
can
en este camino
reduce
para poder hacerlo.
our emissions.
En este proceso
In this
empezamos la
process,
colaboración con Impact Hub para
we're
ver cómo
working with
podíamos hacerlo,
Impact Hub,
y tenemos además la suerte de tener
and
aquí en
we
España
have the chance
un servicio global que se presta desde Barcelona,
to have a
que
service
es
in
la revisión de toda
Barcelona
de esta cadena de valor.
which
Entonces,
knows
pusimos
how
el
to
foco en
analyze
nuestros
value
proveedores
chains.
de aquí,
So
pusimos el foco en aquellos
we
proveedores
have
más
been looking
pequeños y
at this,
medianos,
we've been
pues
looking at
los que a lo mejor no
smaller
tienen las herramientas,
suppliers
no tienen el expertise para poder
who might not have the
avanzar por sí
expertise
solos de una manera
to
con la urgencia que
achieve
requiere
this at
la
the
situación.
speed that we need it
Y con Impact Hub
achieved.
estamos trabajando en el desarrollo
And
de una plataforma
we
que nos
are
ayuda
working with a
en
platform
varios objetivos.
that has
Por
helped us
un
in a
lado,
number of goals.
compartir con ellos por qué
We
este tema
are
es importante,
sharing
cómo estamos trabajando y cuál es el objetivo que nos hemos planteado para reducir nuestras emisiones de carbono, de
with
qué manera los
what are our
involucra a
goals,
ellos,
how are we
de qué
going
manera
to
ellos pueden
reduce
contribuir
our
también
carbon
a
emissions,
este
how can they
objetivo.
help us to
Y
achieve
luego
this
una parte muy
objective,
importante
and
que
another
comentaba Antonio, el
important
tema de la
feature,
comunicación,
which
¿no?
is what Antonio
Cuando
mentioned earlier, which
comunicamos
is
estamos también
communication. When
generando
we
este
talk
cambio de
about what we're
comportamiento
doing,
y estamos acompañando a la sociedad como referentes
and we're helping
que somos, con la
society
responsabilidad que ello supone para ir en esta línea todos
to
juntos, ¿no?
go
Entonces,
in
queremos que
this
este proceso
direction
sea
with
lo
us
más abierto
all
y transparente
together,
posible, porque genera estas
because
referencias y nos
this
ayuda
is
en la
what helps
aceleración
us to
de nuestra acción para conseguir este
accelerate
objetivo.
our actions in this direction.
Es muy interesante porque las palabras que me están resonando.
That's very interesting because all of the words are making me be more alert is our collaboration, ecosystem, the way that you were able to view it, Antonio. I can do many things, but I first have to look at who's my supplier, who's behind me, who's ahead of me, who are my customers. Well, the people who are using my products. In that sense, I also heard in Carmen's words, we have a commitment, we have our goals, and now we're starting to work collaboratively with the stakeholders. How would you advise a CEO from any company? It doesn't matter the company because everyone needs to have an analysis and a diagnosis on sustainability and a way to improve. What will be the first steps? Real life action plans. Antonio said actions. I believe that's how it starts. CEO has to take into account finance, laws. There's an increasing number of laws from the European Parliament, from Spain, from the world that are pushing you. Either you comply with them or you're out. The other important aspect is collaboration with the other members of your teams. When Carmen went into Bayer, she brought this information into her company. When Antonio goes back to Impact Hub, he also brings the new information. Collaboration and activism from people within the company. It will increase the capability of understanding, accompanying, learning. This is less about giving orders and more about listening to everyone to see what we're doing. This activation, not of the CEO, but of humans within companies. Well, I believe we have to look inside and then look at the ecosystem. What are we doing right? What do we need to improve? It's not just about sponsoring a project like we used to do before, a project you don't even know what's the final result, what is the impact in the end. Let's see how from inside our houses we can change things, how we can change things with suppliers, with the communication. It's more about communication within my scope of action. What is that I can do? Then is when I can look at the ecosystems. I can seek other partners. What can I do? What can I do better? We have to be open. There's no collaboration without opening up to the rest of the world. We have to be real. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? We have to assess all of that. Nowadays, we're much more transparent. You cannot make up information. People have access to all the information. You have to be truthful about what you can do today, what you can do better, who can help me, who can collaborate with me. Well, of course, facilitators are there for that. There are large groups such as Impact Hub and so many other companies that are supporting other companies to be able to transform themselves. Well, in the case of the CEO as a person, I think it's very interesting the way Manuel uses this more emotional language. In the specific case of leaderships, I think it's very important this process of looking inside ourselves, conviction, to be able to mobilize someone. We have to raise awareness, and you need to do your own thing. Dangers of greenwashing. Greenwashing is wonderful. I think it's wonderful because it generates the situation that psychologists call cognitive dissonance. If I who lead a company, if I'm talking about this, but I don't actually believe it, the more you talk about it, you're going to have to face what you believe in. You're going to transform your process. It's going to generate a movement, either into schizophrenia or into the firm belief that you need to be coherent with your messages and with what you're saying. So in the case of these leaders, they have to do this work of introspection and assume the leadership with firm beliefs that this is what needs to be done. There's, of course, our responsibility, and we need to be aware of the responsibility that we have without feeling angst, but generating awareness for change. Carmen.
Sí, yo estoy de acuerdo con los compañeros en la importancia de la convicción. Creo que aplica a CEOs y a cualquier persona involucrada en una sociedad, ¿no?
CEOs, but also everyone who is involved in their own
society.
Sentido
de empujar el cambio dentro de nuestros entornos más cercanos. Hay un punto muy importante que también ha salido del contexto, de entender bien qué está pasando a nuestro alrededor, no ser expertos solamente en nuestras áreas, en nuestros negocios, que ya se supone que nuestra in our businesses, well, that is assumed it's our area of expertise, but we need to understand what's our relationship to everything that surrounds us. And we also need to look into the long term. Cómo las acciones, el día a día, impacta en este entorno y en este futuro para intentar
into this environment, into the future, so we can try to anticipate
posibles retos que nos puedan ocasionar.
The future possible challenges we may have to face. Something else I would like to say. We've always been working from the office into the inside. All the decision-making was done inside, but now we have been pushed out of the offices. And now we have to look from the outside and in what way we're connected to the society that surrounds us. This helps us understand what we're doing, what we're not. And other spaces, such as Impact Hub Madrid, allow us to be away from our daily work environments and be able to have a larger vision of what's available, what are the trends outside. You don't see this from inside your office. You see when you're with other people, encountering people that you don't expect, and that's where you can get information. That's where there is disruption that actually creates change and makes things different for the planet. That's right. We have the pandemic that has had a huge impact at the health and economic levels that we're going to have to suffer from in the long term. But it has indeed accelerated some of the processes that were happening already before. This change about the work philosophy, this has completely been vanished. This day of work where you commuted to work, I stay in my office all day, then I go back home, this has detonated. It has created a completely new set of relationships, processes, and that in itself is feeding this whole process of change. We are all aware, we have read Harari and some other authors saying that we are in a temporal process of transformation. This is a critical turning point. We're probably heading into a new Renaissance era or whatever comes out of this. The pandemic has detonated certain elements that are completely changing awareness and different ways of doing things. Well, really, we were touching upon very interesting topics, such as this humanistic perspective. We're not only companies, we're groups of people that collaborate. Then we go home and do things differently. Let's demystify this and look into the topics that are covered by Harari precisely. From the involvement of people, how can public administration do things? What is public administration doing well? How can they improve? There's a change already there for citizens, for companies. How is public administration doing? Well, again, I think they have a role as a regulator, but also as a promoter. Those regulations incentivize or not these changes. Public administration is being increasingly more open to new participation of civil society, of activisms, even beyond just on election day. We can be more open to a series of policies together with these different actors. I think we are already coming from this impulse for change. People are no longer being done top to down. But however, the other way around, we can still amplify those spaces. There are innovation hubs, Media Lab, that had its presence for a while, and many others that are generating spaces where society can be an active player and generating different processes. Those are new paths. The funds that are now being focused on investing certain amounts, but only on sustainable initiatives and committed to the change that is what society wants to see. I believe that this is the path that we should promote, that we should follow, that we should support sustainable initiatives and to halt those that are not.
Okay.
I'm going to give you this microphone. There's a very interesting initiative called Cities Plus B. B Corp measures not only your business model, but also your access within your society. So this methodology is being used in many cities, such as Cascais, Sao Paulo, New York. Next one is Barcelona, where they're going to use this methodology to measure the collective impact. We measure markers that can change things, and we also connect them to the SDGs, which is the path we want to follow during the impact. To me, the city is a venue that allows you to be proud of your city. The impact of a city can really be measured and create a collaboration. At B Corp, we say, together we are a force for good. That's very beautiful, but that's actually what's happening. There's something positive. When you do something positive, business goes better. So it's an initiative to promote the activation of these companies, to be able to generate spaces from public administration to facilitate, maybe even in an indirect manner. Let's promote those ecosystems so they are the ones that generate the change. Carmen, how do you see the role of public-private
Yo creo que este cambio de mentalidad
partnership?
del que estábamos hablando, que nos aplica a las grandes corporaciones,
Well,
a
I
las
think this
pequeñas, a todos como
change of the
sociedad,
mindset
involucra de la
for
misma
everyone,
manera a los
society,
gobiernos, ¿no?
SME,
Quiero
large
decir,
companies,
momento
is
de
also
repensar la manera
affecting
en la que tenemos que
governments.
hacer
They
las
need
cosas,
to
y todo
rethink
pasa por
the
la
way,
colaboración, porque son
in which they do things.
retos
And
conjuntos que tenemos
it all
como
goes through
individuos y como parte de esta
collaboration.
sociedad.
These are all
Nosotros entendemos
challenges we all
que,
have to
bueno,
face
que este es el
together as
único
a
camino y llevamos
society.
tiempo ya haciéndolo
We
así.
believe
Como
this
os
is the
decía,
only way
nosotros
to do
tenemos presencia
things.
en el
We've been
país en
doing them like this
diferentes,
for a long
diferentes
time.
puntos. Nuestra sede está en Barcelona,
Our
en
headquarters are
San
in
Despí, pero tenemos
Barcelona,
plantas de producción en Asturias,
but we have
en Madrid, en Alcalá de
production
Henares,
plants
en
in
Valencia, tenemos centros de
Asturias,
investigación
in Alcalá de Henares, in
en Sevilla, en
Valencia. We have
Almería,
research
otro
centers
también
in
dentro de la
Seville,
fábrica de
in
Alcalá de Henares.
Almería,
Bueno, quiero decir, y
in
cualquier
Alcalá de
acción que
Henares
hagamos
as well.
nosotros en cada uno de nuestros centros,
So
estamos
any
contribuyendo
action
también
in
a la
any of
realidad
our centers
de esas localidades, de esas
promotes
ciudades, ¿no?
and makes
Entonces,
difference in those
entendemos que todo
communities.
pasa por tener siempre abierto este vínculo hacia
So
la
we
colaboración
understand we should
y
always be
sí que
open
también con
for
el compromiso
collaboration.
de ir más allá con esto. O sea,
And we
ahora
need to
la
go
conversación y
beyond
cómo
that.
ponemos en común
The
nuestro conocimiento,
conversation
nuestro
should be
expertise, nuestras
should be
herramientas para que juntos
how we
podamos
put
ir
together
más
our
lejos.
tools,
Yo
our
insisto
knowledge,
otra
our
vez en que
expertise
no podemos perder
to
de vista,
see
lo
how we
habéis
can do
comentado varias
things
veces también en la
differently.
mesa, de que hay una urgencia por
We
actuar
cannot
todo
forget
por
that there
actuar
is an
en
urgency
línea con la
in all
sostenibilidad
of this.
y compartir este conocimiento,
We
compartir
need
estas
to
buenas
share
prácticas,
this
entender
knowledge,
también cuáles
these
son las
good
necesidades de estos
practices,
entornos, nos
what
ayuda a
are
ir
the
más rápido, ¿no?
realities of our
y
environments.
a
All
que
of this
juntos podamos
help us
llegar más lejos.
do things together and go further.
Yo creo que la administración pública tiene el rol que yo creo que Clara ha escrito muy bien.
I think the public administration has this role that Clara has mentioned before of generating spaces, incentives, etc. In this moment, companies as actors, and I'm talking from SMEs to large corporations, it's a completely new actor from a systemic change perspective in social life, in the planet, than in the Renaissance or in the Middle Ages. Right now, companies are the big actor who can really accelerate processes much more than governments can. Governments need to put in place the regulation, they need to incentivize, and civil society can make pressure. But right now, in this race towards sustainability, I believe that the most differentiated role is that of companies. The companies have the ability to make real change. So we should focus on this type of events, such as Madrid platform, where the idea is to generate synergies between different business initiatives, Spain, Europe, Latin America. We have to focus on companies, on what they can do at different levels. I think it's quite disruptive what you just said, because usually there's talk about other type of actors. Of course, it's companies, the ones that put in place the means for production, and that's where climate change starts. Is it profitable to be sustainable nowadays? Yes.
Next question.
Next question. I fully agree with what Antonio said. There's a new identity. It's not the consumer, not the company. There's a super entity, which are those people from different entities that work together. So it's super complicated. If it's complicated to lead a company. Now there's this new goal that is, well, we have companies, it's more agile, companies are more agile, they have more resources, they can do more things. Yes, but for all of this to make sense, to be sustainable, this is the way to move forward. Is it profitable? Well, laws that are being passed now, either you reduce your emissions or you will be fined. What they're going to do in the US, they're going to start measuring how many natural resources you're using up. Those resources are no longer free. You're going to have to pay for them. So society is going to judge you. Investors are going to judge you to see if you're being a positive force or not. You're going to be self-excluding yourself from customers, society, and even from your employees. You need to be sustainable and work together with other people to make a difference. Well, profitability is very important because it's a conceptual barrier. What we've done is change our gaze. What does profitability mean? In the 70s, in the 80s, profitability was, is it profitable, my own little slice of my company, my expenses, my earnings, without looking at anything outside of it? When you look at the effect of companies and you look at the economical impact that you're generating in your environment, then needs to be taken care of by public administration and citizens, the net result of certain practices is negative. But if I only look at one little slice of a certain activity, then, oh, it's very profitable. But you may be generating huge environmental and social costs that the rest of the world needs to assume. And if we put that in the balance of earnings and expenses, the final result will be negative. So there's a change in the way of reporting. There's a change in the demands of the public administration. For instance, looking at the CO2 emissions, this change of perspective has changed the reality of profitability.
And this depends on the impact that it's having on your environment and your surroundings. Now, we have a question that's come from streaming. Marta? Yes. So if there's more time, I have another 3 or 4 questions afterwards. So the question isn't directed to anyone specifically. Are there any tools that we can use to apply sustainability to SMEs? And here we're talking regardless of any sector. And I think it's clear as well that we're talking about common measures, shared measures, and any strategic methods. There's more than 100,000 companies that have signed up to take these impact assessments. The tool is free. And it gives a much wider range of features. It's not just sustainability, but it's also suppliers, clients, employees, etc. So we're not just looking at one specific feature. And then there's also a tool called SDG Action Manager, which is global and which is also free and is linked to this impact assessment tool. And this creates a roadmap, objectives, stages for achieving the SDGs. I know there's plenty of other tools as well, but these are very useful tools. So, and for example, in one of his other roles, this is one of the things that Daniel Truran helped us to achieve, and it allows us to combine our focus on all the different aspects of the company. Carmen, yeah, you still with us, Carmen? Do you want to say anything, Carmen? I can't see whether or not you're looking at me if you want to speak. Well, it's all been very interesting when you were talking about whether or not sustainability was profitable, and it's the only way it can be. And as Antonio said, we have to change our perspectives. We can't only look at our business activities for their financial results in that year. We also have to look at it from a sustainability perspective, and that's a major change in mindset. And if we have this wider perspective, then it changes the way we look at business. And in terms of tools, exactly what Daniel's just said is that, thankfully, technology is offering us ever more opportunities to have access to knowledge. And the big organizations, the UN and the like, are making these tools ever more accessible to everybody. Now, with regards to tools, I'd just like to say that, yes, when we talk about SMEs, the question that we have is that the tools and the metrics require resources and time. And so a very, very small SME might find this to be really quite a difficult challenge. And therefore, I think it's important to help us to create lean tools that allow us to apply the components to sustainability with just very simple questions, inspiring ourselves maybe with some of the other tools that we've mentioned. For example, we're working on a digital platform where a team of 3, 4, 5 people, just a small team, which can't liberate an entire person and allocate them to sustainability for months at a time. But for example, they can quickly start processes of change and identify areas for change. So I think this is the thing. We need to try and help these very small companies with agile, lean tools that are very fair, easy to use, and allow them to make an impact. Excellent. Another question. In fact, this comes from me. I was reading the other day about sustainability, talking about environmental sustainability. And if you talk about big companies and globalization, that much of its environmental footprint came from its suppliers. And so its suppliers in China, in Asia, for example. How do we address this problem? If you've got a big company, when you say, OK, I'm sorting out my pollution, but it's my suppliers that are polluting. But you make choices when you go to the shops and when you buy things. So, in fact, we have to share responsibility, and it's absolutely essential. We have a corporation here that can talk about this. Marta, you've given us your point of view. But the question is, this responsibility that we mentioned earlier, what can I do from home? Well, it's that. You demand from your supplier that they give you reassurances that they are improving also their indexes. You try not to look only at the price, but you also try and give them assistance in the whole change process. And as Antonio said, the influence that corporations have at the moment, it's huge, because they work with the entire chain. And they can also influence public authorities. They can use this power in various areas, and so they have to take choices and accept that responsibility, and I think that's absolutely key. And if we look at CO2, for example, that's taken into account when you are looking to certify your CO2 emissions. The methodology takes into account the carbon footprint of all of your suppliers as well. And this methodology allows you to visualize this. And with regards to company evaluations, there's an index which doesn't take into account these values, or isn't taking into account the sustainability of companies when it's establishing the index. And so we were saying, how do you think there should be a change in the way that companies are assessed and evaluated? There is no one single way of measuring companies. Everybody's looking for the ideal solution to measure the sustainability impact of companies, because there's a lot of money, but only if you're one of the more sustainable companies. And so financing companies are prepared to invest in companies, but only if they're sustainable companies. And a number of entities are looking at the best way to evaluate these companies. And already in 6 months, I think we will start to have some good tools. And they'll put the finger exactly on this point of how can we measure the sustainability of these companies. And it's a very interesting discussion, because it's also linked to the GDP as a measure of national value. And already in the in the stock exchanges, there are other indices that are being used, such as Sustainability Index, for example. And now investment funds are looking for these indices. And I think what Daniel was saying is there's now a lot of questioning of the GDP as the only measure of economic situations, and we need to find other metrics. And I don't think it's going to take a long time before we see a new corporate performance measure that includes these new metrics, and that the indexes will change. For example, in the IBEX index, companies have changed their position in the index just because of the way that these things are measured. And we've seen that there's an ecosystem index, for example. Which ecosystem generates the most multinational value? Is it Madrid? Is it Barcelona? No, we've changed the way we measure, and we have incorporated a more environmental and social approach. Do you not agree, Carmen?
Sí, perdonad, porque he perdido la conexión.
Yes, I'm sorry, I lost the connection for a moment.
Cuando hacían esta pregunta. Creo que ya se ha comentado, ¿no?
Yes, I think it's already been said that we look at everything. We look at our own emissions and we look at the emissions of our suppliers. And I think that talking about this collaboration,
ayudando a nuestros proveedores a reducir sus emisiones, es para cumplir nuestros compromisos.
Our goal is to achieve our objectives. We can't set concrete objectives if we don't take into account this aspect. And I think that everything else has been said. That's just the only thing I wanted to add. Thank you.
Pero tenemos aquí otra pregunta. Nos plantean, ¿el desarrollo sostenible implica renunciar a la zona de confort, buscar nuevas alternativas y sustituirlas por las anteriores?
Do we need to find new alternatives? How can we look for new alternatives with consumers, suppliers? How can we convince everybody of the emergency and the urgency? I have two pieces of news. There is no comfort zone. There is no perfect situation. We're all here. We're all in the same situation. So there is no comfort zone. And so if there's no comfort zone, and this is what we need to think about, is there another way of doing things? There's a lot of urgency, there's a lot of stress, and what we need is hope. And I think that the leaders of companies who are able to create hope, Too Good To Go, for example, if you look in their website, you'll see metrics that set out what they've achieved, and this gives hope. And I think here there's a room full of good intentions. And if we all work together, we can make progress and we can achieve something that's better than we've had in the past. But you have to really carefully choose the people that you go on this journey with. Because it's not just for it to be a pleasure, but they need to nourish you. They need to provide you with stimulus that makes you raise your game as well. And talking about this lack of comfort and no comfort zones and collaboration, I think this is the end point of our discussion. I'd like to thank all of you for being here with us today. It's been a real pleasure to have you here. It's been extremely interesting. We'd also like to thank the technical team who have done a wonderful job, and for you watching us in home, and our interpreters who have been working away behind the cameras. And so the key word is collaboration with all of the companies who form Madrid platform, and a platform which is based on this very idea of working together and driving sustainability at the business level. Thank you once again for having watched this from home and for those who have attended the meeting face-to-face. And Marta, our MC. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.